Good afternoon, everyone. You may or may not know I am not Professor Fredo Durand, who is the official professor for the class. And Fredo will show up from time to time, but my name is Mike Stopa, and I am from Sony Interactive Entertainment and the makers of PlayStation. Actually, I was a professor here in chemistry at MIT just a few years ago. I went from essentially teaching the Born-Oppenheimer approximation in Building 6 to, shooting robot dinosaurs with Aloy the Nora Huntress on the West Coast. So if I start writing the time-dependent Schrodinger equation on the board, at least I know I'm in a place where everybody will understand it. And then we can kind of switch to time-dependent chemistry. So first question is, who here plays video games? Almost everyone, but like last year, not everyone exactly. Okay, what is your favorite video game? Just shout it out.
Elden Ring.
Elden Ring, winner of Best Game of the Year like 2 years ago or something like that?
Ori and Blankford.
Which one?
Ori and Blankford.
Ori and Blankford. I don't know that game. Oh, okay. I don't think I know that. Okay. Other favorites? Which one? Final Fantasy. Cool. Other games? The Last of Us. Any other favorite games here? Sorry?
Tekken.
My ears are so bad.
Tekken. It's like Street Fighter on the PlayStation.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. So my favorite game has been, for years, Horizon Zero Dawn. And this is me posing with Aloy when I first started at SIE 2 years ago. So I'm going to give kind of an outline of what I'm going to talk about today. And the first thing I want to say is I got to tell you something about the structure of the class, the mechanics of it. There is a web page where a lot of the information that we're going to need is going to be stored. Second, I'm going to spend some time just talking about what is a game. What's the philosophy of gaming? Where did game history come from? I want to also emphasize that this theme of this course is the nexus of gaming and AI. And that means, kind of in my feeling, it's not just that AI is helping us produce new and more interesting games, but games in their own way are helping to create the next wave of AI. They become laboratories for AI. And that's something that we're going to come back to time and time again. I also will give you an overview of what research in gaming is like these days, not just at SIE, Sony Interactive Entertainment. If I say SIE, that's what I mean. But throughout the community, because we are a major player, Sony's a major player, but we're by no means the only one. And then I want to dive into 3 topics that I really have had firsthand experience with. A couple of them, one of them is with a professor at MIT named Antonio Torralba, and I'll describe that. But I want to get beyond just the level of high level and get into some nitty gritty. I don't know, for the most part, what the individual backgrounds of all the people are here. I want to say that I was hoping, and when we advertised this is the second year we did this. We did this last January as well, that people who are geeks like me and who know everything about AI are great, but people who are artists or writers or things like that, we want you to feel welcome as well. So by all means, kind of interrupt with questions if something seems opaque, and don't be embarrassed because you won't be the only one who doesn't get it. So as I say, it's the nexus of games and AI, and part of the theme of that is that games and AI have grown up together. Video games and AI have grown up together. Like in 1950, there was something called Birdie the Brain that played tic-tac-toe at some national fair in Canada. And of course, there have been games that have been played by computers for a number of years, like chess and so on and so forth. And we'll get into that. But anyway, the course is not just about techniques, but it's about how to think about games. All right. So as far as nuts and bolts, so Nicole Hoffman here is very helpful and has been helpful in putting this all together. We have a web page, and this is a project-oriented course. So what we would like you all to do is to do a project. What kind of project? Well, so this, I can't really go into the details of that here. There's a document that's online, and everybody, Nicole knows where to find that document. Yeah. So if you go to the web page, there's a document called Nexus of Games and AI Activity Projects.doc, and it gives examples of different types of projects that you can do. And I'll give a few examples from last year at the very end of this lecture, just to give you an idea, not to give you a bar to cross over, but rather to just show you kind of the variety of some of the things that people did. The lectures are Monday, Wednesday, Friday, from 1 to 2 p.m. However, there's a change in the schedule for a week from today. There are going to be 2 lectures next Monday. We forgot, or I forgot, that the 19th of January was a holiday, and we had one more lecturer than we had spots for lecturers. So Gail Lucas is coming on the 12th instead. She will lecture in the morning. So you got back-to-back lectures with, I think, a half an hour or an hour break in between. So sorry about that, but we wanted to make sure you guys got everything. Okay, the projects. We would like you to hand in the projects, which would be a set of PowerPoint slides, on the 28th, which is the last Wednesday of the class. And on the 30th, in case you don't know, we will judge those. That we'll have to do a judgment of all the different projects, and the winner gets a PlayStation PS5. So that's something to give you an incentive, which is, by the way, unquestionably the best gaming console in the world. And there are no arguments about that. I mean, I know a lot of people like those other brands, but so the 30th presentation will be presentations of, let's say, 4 minutes, depending on how many presentations we have. Needless to say, you can work together. You're encouraged to work together. We may or may not have more than one PS5, so if a team of 2 wins, we may have a mud wrestling contest to see which person gets the PS5, but probably we'll come up with a second PS5. All right, so let me just ask, any questions about kind of the mechanics of the class? Anybody? Yeah, please.
So I'm not taking this for credit, because so do I still have to do the project?
So no. In fact, last year the whole class was not for credit, and so nobody is required to do a project. We do ask the people who are taking it for credit, in order to get the credit to do a project. But yeah, it's a good question.
But can I still do a project?
Sorry?
Can I still do a project?
Yeah, we would absolutely encourage you to do a project even if you're not taking it for credit. Yeah. So, any other questions, sort of generally speaking? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think I saw that the course is potentially going to be posted somewhere.
Yes.
And so, like, for example, like, I cannot come on the 12th. So,
Right.
like, can I catch up on that content somewhere online, or are they going to be, like, posted, like, following the conclusion of the entire course?
That's a good question. I mean, the assumption was that it would be after the conclusion of the course. Nicole, can we temporarily post the fiction? I mean, is there any place we can post them for the students only up until?
Yes, I'll post them in the Google Drive. We
Awesome.
have to get the raw video from MVP.
Yeah.
And as soon as we have that, I can post it in the Google Drive where only students have access.
Yeah. Last year we just did Teams meetings or Zoom meetings, And so that wasn't as jazzy and cool as Miles and his team are capable of doing. So we really want to, reach a broader audience. But for the purposes you're talking about, for us, yeah, we'll see what we can do about that. So you can grab that. Yeah. The same thing for anybody else who can't make it for particular days. Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay. So this is supposed to advance. Why didn't it advance? Sorry. There we go. What is a game? This is a game. This is a game I happen to like to play. And it's a rare photo because in this particular game that I'm playing, you see the pile of little red things, red and white things in front of me. There's a big pile and those are mine. For the most part, the big piles belong to other people. But in any case, in this case, I was winning and I was very proud of it. So games have, as you no doubt know, been part of every human society that we're familiar with. Supposedly, the first recorded game was created in China 4,000 years ago by the Emperor Yao. And the Emperor Yao had a son whose name I think was Gunzhao, who evidently was a degenerate. And so Yao created this game called Go. And the game was supposed to teach strategy and patience and systematic thinking. There's no telling, as far as the history is concerned, whether Deng Zhao took these lessons or not. But in any case, games have been with us for a long time. But what is a game? So the first thing I want to do is I want to just get from the audience, from you guys, a list of things that are essential. What do you think of as something that goes into a game? Again, please just shout it out. So what, if I say game elements? First volunteer. Yeah, I got 3 volunteers at once. And again, my ears are bad, so shout.
Interactivity.
Interactivity, okay. That's a good one. Rewards, let's say reward system. Opponents. Mechanics. I'll say mechanics and I'll say adding to that my own environment. Did you?
Emergent behavior.
Emergent behavior? That's a good one. Rules, excellent. Got to have rules. What else?
Objectives.
Objectives, okay. Good one. Anything else?
Social for some games?
Social participation?
Sure.
Or can we just say players?
Sure.
Players? Sorry? Addiction. Okay. Actually, I've been playing a game lately that I've gotten addicted to called Stellar Blade. Does anybody play Stellar Blade? Yeah, it's kind of really crazy. Anyway, okay. So let's work with those. All right. So nowadays, if you want to know anything, of course, you ask ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT, what is a game? So a game is a structured activity often undertaken, forgive me for just reading this, for enjoyment, learning, or competitive purposes that typically involves rules, goals, interaction among players, between players, and a system. The concept of a game is broad, spans physical, mental, social, and digital domains. Philosophers, theorists, and designers have debated the nature of games, but here are some key elements: rules, goals, interaction, challenge, voluntary participation, feedback. So you guys basically hit it out of the park, right? I mean, you guys basically got what ChatGPT, well, I mean, hit it out of the park. You agreed with ChatGPT. Whether that's hitting it out of the park or not, I'm not sure. Anyway, so I want to spend a little time talking about philosophy. My favorite philosopher is Wittgenstein. Who here has read Wittgenstein? Almost no one. I would recommend to you that if there's any philosophy that you read in your college career, reading philosophical investigations by Wittgenstein is as important as anything. So Wittgenstein is is almost always divided into early Wittgenstein and late Wittgenstein. So the early Wittgenstein was what is called a logical positivist. Logical positivists were people like Bertrand Russell, A.J. Ayers, and their approach to the world was everything can be understood with logic and empirical science, and it was really allied with the scientific age of the late 19th, early 20th century. Wittgenstein then abandoned all that, and in his late work, he studied the philosophy of language. Now, some people say, or at least if you go to Wikipedia, they'll say that Wittgenstein is one of the first people who sort of systematically tried to describe what games were. So this is what, according to him, he argues that the elements of games, such as play, rules, and competition, all fail adequately to define what games are. People apply the term game to a range of disparate human activities that bear resemblance to one another, what we might call family resemblances. So one of the essential ideas of Wittgenstein is that words are just symbols, that the word game is entirely determined by how people use the word game. Meaning is usage. That is an incredibly powerful concept, and it goes far beyond games. But so from Wittgenstein's point of view, the meaning of games is nothing more than the sum total of all the uses that people make of the word. And so there is no kind of formal, fixed definition of a game. That said, then you might say, okay, that begs the question, well, what do people use the word game to mean? Now, there's this guy, and his name's Bernard Suits, who turns out to be a very interesting person. He came up with this aphorism, which has been used a lot in philosophy of games. It says, playing a game is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. He wrote a book called The Grasshopper, Games, Life, and Utopia. Has anybody ever heard of this book? I had not heard of it either, but I'm going to make a point of, come on in. I'm going to make a point of reading it, actually. So in this world, it's a futuristic world where the Socrates of that world is a grasshopper who engages in dialogues with people. People have had all their physical means met, and so they don't need to work anymore. So all they do is they spend their life playing games. So in any case, is an interesting character. And this thing, playing a game, is a voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. I think is kind of an interesting way to look at it. This is a book that I've read recently, or not too long ago, which I think is also kind of foundational in a way. It's by a philosopher who I think is at University of Utah. I might be wrong about that. Named Sithai Guyen. And forgive me, I'm just going to read this again. In games, the argument is that games are a form of art. And it's a form of art where agency is the medium. It says, in games, we engineer a world of the game, the agency we will occupy to fit us and our desires. Struggles in games can be carefully shaped in order to be interesting, fun, or even beautiful. Game designers don't just create a world, they create who you will be in that world. They tell you what abilities to use and what goals to take on. In other words, games work in the medium of agency. I read that, and kind of what pops to mind is Dungeons and Dragons, right? You have a dungeon master, and I have actually never played Dungeons and Dragons, but I know it enough that you have a dungeon master or a dragon master who sort of sculpts the world for you and gives you, sort of directs the agency. But this idea that games are agency as art goes beyond Dungeons and Dragons, even like chess, right? In chess, there are pieces. That's your environment. Your agency is to be able to do a certain set of things. There's also this quotation in Agency as Art. It says, games threaten us with a fantasy of moral clarity. That seemed very profound to me. I don't actually know what it means, but I thought I'd put it up there anyway. Okay, so what else? So there was an interesting article that came out by a guy named Ted Chiang a year ago. Ted Chiang wrote for The New Yorker, and why AI isn't going to make art. He gave a presentation at NeurIPS. Does anybody know what NeurIPS is? Neural IPS, right? It's a very big, maybe one of the most important AI conferences in Vancouver last year, which I sat in on. It's very interesting. And he says, basically, he wrote a book which became the basis of the movie Arrival. The book is called Story of Your Life from 1998. And so what he argued was that, like, at least language models of today cannot produce a novel. That essentially you have 100, and he had kind of a Shannon-like information theory argument, that you write a novel, you write 100,000 words, and every word is a decision. And not only are the words a decision, but the evolution of the plot, the theme, the characters, those are all decisions as well. The idea is not that you couldn't put enough prompts into ChatGPT to create the novel. The idea is that by the time you've done that, you've already written the novel. So it hasn't really done anything for you. So that's his argument. So as I put it up there, the creative information is coming from you, not the model. So take that with a grain of salt. But I want to create one sort of conceptual point here. When we're talking about games being agency, art and agency, the point that we're talking about is the people who create the games, not necessarily the people who play the games, right? So, and that kind of puts the historical picture backwards, because if you look at the history of computer science and gaming, there are, in fact, computer programs nowadays. There's something called procedural content generation, like for Super Mario or something like that, where the computer will create new Mario landscapes and games. However, for the most part, computer science and computing entered gaming playing the games, not creating the games. So examples of games where that's true are, of course, chess. I guess it was Big Blue that beat Garry Kasparov for the best, to become the best chess player in the world. I'm not sure how many years ago that was now. The AlphaGo computer beat the best Go player in the world. Does anybody know, the graphics are not very good here on the bottom. Can you tell what that game in the lower left is? It's StarCraft, exactly. So there's a computer called AlphaStar, which beat the best StarCraft players in the world. Yes, please.
I have a question there, because AlphaStar eventually did lose, right, and had the same sort of, eyeball tracking constraints that humans do.
That's right.
And that's also because of fog law and the whole unknown information paradigm, which I think AI still struggled with. So,
Yes.
So what's some of the thinking there, and what are they to apply in that sense? Before these also are overcome with unknown information paradox.
what is, I don't quite understand the question. I mean,
So in StarCraft or Age of Empires, for these,
yes.
you have the fog of war, and essentially you just don't know what's happening in the darkness,
Right, right.
AIs obviously don't necessarily know this.
Right.
But then there's some resources that you could spend to scout or to sort of, base, let's say, small armies to get that information.
Right.
What are the kind of breakthroughs required before Alpha Star, for instance, becomes 10 out of 10 versus where it is right now?
Well, so, I mean, Alpha Star was definitely handicapped, right? I mean, for example, a computer can push a button, not infinitely fast, but far faster than a human can. And the creators, when they restricted the number of button pushes that Alpha Star would be able to do. Otherwise, it just wouldn't be any competition at all. There's unknown information, right? There's exploration and exploitation, which are part of this. I'm not sure if this is what you're getting at, but I mean, these games were basically trained with reinforcement learning. They were given, reward functions, and run many times to the point where essentially the policies which they developed were better than human players. I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but maybe we can talk about it a little bit later as well, or unless you want to kind of.
We can discuss it.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's a game that Sony. We wrote a Nature paper on the game. Which game is this? This was Gran Turismo. And Gran Turismo is like one of our more popular games. There's also, I should point out, a paper that came out not long ago on Minecraft. Does anybody here play Minecraft? Not a couple of people do, yeah. So there was a paper that came out just a couple of years ago from some group. I think they were centered at NVIDIA, but we have one researcher who participated on playing Minecraft, which is quite complicated and not necessarily the same as playing chess or games like that. Anyway, I've already said this, but most of these games depended upon a paradigm called reinforcement learning. Now, reinforcement learning, last year I talked a little bit about a guy named Peter Abiel, who's at Berkeley, who is actually one of our collaborators, who developed a lot of the theory of reinforcement learning. He has a series of lectures online that describe sort of the mathematics of how you create a policy, how you use Bell's equation to optimize the policy, starting with a very simple thing like a grid world. So those are definitely worth looking at, because a lot of the major advances in computer science have been on games and in reinforcement learning. Alpha Star, the Rubik's Cube, AlphaGo, those are all kind of highlights of reinforcement learning. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and start talking about, first of all, research topics in gaming from a high level, and then I'm going to drill down and I'm going to talk about three different examples of things that I maybe, in principle, know a little bit more about. But let me stop here and see, are there any, but I did want to start with the philosophy, get us thinking, what is a game? What are we doing when we're creating games? What are we doing when we're playing games? So any questions at this point, or should we just kind of plow on? Nope? All right, cool. All right. So not just SIE, but the whole community is involved in a variety of research topics that, and I kind of categorize them here. You could name a lot more than this. One we could call player engagement, like, for example, physics-based, the physics of animation, the geometry. There's a professor named Justin Solomon at MIT who specializes in geometry, and we've kind of worked with him. There's another professor named Vincent Sitzman who works on something here at MIT, who works on things called world models. So world models are ways of taking a scene and abstracting it in the form of like neural radiance fields so that while you have just a bunch of pictures of a scene, you then generate a three-dimensional object which can then be seen from all different points of view. It's something that's computationally very intensive, and the idea of actually embedding it into real games is something for the future, but nevertheless, that's a topic which in particular MIT is very good at. There's VR, virtual, yes please.
Mind just repeating the name of the world model researcher at MIT you mentioned?
Yeah, his name is Vincent Sitzman, Sitzmann, young guy. Looks like he's like 14 years old, but he's very sharp, and I'd certainly recommend you check him out. And Justin Solomon is the professor who specializes in geometry. There's virtual reality and artificial reality, obviously. There are things like player emotions. You know, a lot of what we're interested in is understanding how a game is going to be successful or not. There's one of our speakers, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning. We are not going to give you a systematic development of games from Emperor Yao up to now. Our speakers are from different areas of games. Some are our SIE engineers. We have a professor from USC who's coming, a professor from Northeastern who does what's called serious games, who uses games to study, for example, autism. We have Professor Fox Harrell, who's an MIT professor. He's going to talk a little bit about the social aspect. You know, there's a real convergence nowadays in social media and Discord, and people don't play games alone in their living room quite so much anymore. People play online, multiple MMOs, multiple massive multiplayer games. One of the speakers is a guy named Ram Barankin, who's my buddy, and he explores things like social media for trying to determine whether a game is going to be successful or not. In other words, going to Reddits and things like that. And he insists that he's able to tell months in advance of when a game crashes or when a game takes off, just from the sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis is a big thing, but he goes a little bit beyond just basic sentiment analysis. And so he's going to talk a little bit about that. That's I think, you know, player emotions, or at least the reaction of the game is in that category. Streaming, Eric Flores will be here on Friday, and he's somebody who works a lot on cloud gaming, right? So it's you know, there is this dichotomy now between people who play on consoles, people who play on laptops, people who play online, and people who don't play online. So cloud streaming is really important. You know, what Eric will say is that when you're sending information over the internet, you have roughly 17 milliseconds to render a frame. If you're doing 60 frames a second, you know, everything's got to be done with enormous speed. And so in that context, we have a researcher working with us. His name's Alan Bovik. Does anybody know what VMAF is? VMAF? Right? Yeah, it's kind of obscure. So Alan Bovik invented something called VMAF, video something, something, something. I don't remember. But it's a quality assessment for Netflix. So instead of having subjects sitting on a couch with a clipboard recording how good this video is, or where there are glitches, or what the video stream quality is, he invented an automated system that can look at a movie and say, you know, is this streaming good? Is it not good? Movies are great, but with movies you can buffer, right? If you have a movie coming in overline, it'll buffer things and it'll hold things. With games, you really need to be at the 17 millisecond level. So he's working on video quality assessment, VQA, for the gaming world, and that's something that's very important in the streaming world. the thing that has always interested me the most are realistic NPCs. NPCs, everybody knows what NPC means, right? 3 years ago, I didn't know what an NPC was, but now I know. I think that the whole area of realistic NPCs starts to blend into what's called AGI, which is basically, general AI, creating the Terminator, essentially. The ideas of language, a lot of what goes into language models and how language models can be used in games, whether they will be used in games. We don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. Having game assistants, for example, all these things are ways of creating machines that we think are reasoning. So that's kind of an overview of some of the topics. These things like explainable AI, game assistant, I'm actually going to talk about myself. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think back in maybe 2011, I think there was something that I saw about Skyrim where there was a character who was a prison guard, and they killed a prisoner to take some kind of bread that he had, and because of that, the player couldn't complete quest because of the key that the other person had. So in terms of creating characters that can actually kind of think.
Right.
Does that count? I guess as actually thinking or not really.
Well, so the question of whether or not, for example, language models can reason is a big deal. So I thought you were going a different direction with this. So you're saying this in Skyrim,
Yeah.
which is a great game.
Right.
There was some motif in which somebody had to kill a prisoner to get bread, and
Well, so they had a system that the characters they all had
independent actions.
To eat.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And because of that, this character killed a different character to
get bread.
Yes, correct. So does that, I guess, count as an AI?
Well, I would think so, right? It's like what somebody said, emergent behavior in a way, or was it rules based?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, we get back to Wittgenstein. Does that count as AI? It sort of depends on what you define as AI. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but I do think one thing that's interesting that you're bringing up is that there are moral issues involved in games. That there are ethical things that come into games, and as all of you probably know, there were some kind of hullabaloo about some of the language models just a few years ago that would go off the rails and start becoming very racist or saying really bad things, right? And so a lot of the people who created those language models had to kind of modify them so that they didn't generalize in a way that was, that we as human beings find repulsive. So I thought that's where you were going with that. But I'm going to give a couple examples of things related to what you're talking about. They're speculative. They're not in games right now. But maybe it'll get a little bit to that question. Yeah. I want to say something. Anybody play Red Dead Redemption here? Yeah. Okay. So people told me Red Dead Redemption is like the greatest game in the world. So I played it for a little while, and it is a great game. But while I'm playing it, I'm riding along on a horse with my buddies, and we're in the snow, and we go to this house where people are having a party. And then my buddy goes to the front door, and somebody comes out to meet him, and the guy who comes out to meet him says, I'm sorry, we can't help you. And the prompt says, okay, get your gun ready to protect your buddy. And so as I'm thinking, this guy comes out of his house in the snow and just tells us, sorry, we can't help you, and we're supposed to shoot him? It's like, I'm not sure I'm there yet, So there are kind of moral choices in a lot of games that they have to make. Anyway, so that's kind of a silly aside. Anyway, so let me get on to some practical examples. Persuasion in games. Hang on a second. So one of the kind of main themes of the future of AI and gaming is putting realistic personalities into games, right? So typically, so I'm not sure about Skyrim, but in most AAA, what we call AAA games, what you have are menus. You walk up to some NPC and you say, talk to the NPC. You have menus and things you can say, and there's a conversation tree, essentially. And that's the way things are done. And you have actually literally actors who act out the lines. So that's great, but you might, in some sense, want to have NPCs embody more interesting characteristics than that. One of my colleagues, Gail Lucas, who will be here, said, okay, ask the question basically, can we go beyond that? Can we produce some kind of realistic personality in an NPC? And in particular, she works on a couple of things. She works on negotiation using AI and also persuasion using AI. And she also happens to love games. And does anybody know what this game is? Anybody? Days Gone, right? So yeah, let me ask that question again. Does anybody know what this game is? Yeah, it's Days Gone. So this Days Gone is made by Ben Studios. It's a great game. Your name is Deacon, and you ride a really cool motorcycle, and it's kind of a zombie apocalypse type of game. I think the zombies are called creepers in this game. And so this is one of Gail's favorite games. So she wanted essentially, to move beyond scripted dialogues and menus and say, I think I have two the same slide, yeah. And put some kind of persuasive abilities into the game. So how is that? There's a particular point in the game where Deacon goes to two camps. One camp is run by somebody named Tucker, another camp is run by somebody named Copeland, and they both want a box of medicine that's gotten lost, and they both ask Deacon to go find it. But that interaction is very simple, and in fact there are whole Reddits dedicated to which of those two things you should do as a strategy, because let's say Tucker's camp has motorcycle parts or something like that, and Copeland's camp maybe has some weapons that you need. So the strategy is different. But still, the interaction is primitive in the actual game. So Gail is a psychologist, and I think that we're going to find that psychologists are extremely important in the future of any kind of research in gaming, not just for putting realistic personalities in NPCs, but just gauging the interaction of players. But in any case, so she said, okay, well, let's take this interaction between Deacon and these two counselors, and let's use a language model, prompting in a language model, to let the chat model, and she used different language models, but let the language model play the role of Tucker or play the role of Copeland and have subjects And there's a couple hundred subjects who would take this, play Deacon, and talk to Tucker, and talk to Copeland, and decide who to give the medicine to. All right, that's fine, but she based this on psychological theory. There's a paper that came out a few years ago called Persuasion for Good. And in that, they sort of delineated a series of persuasion strategies. I gave it, there's a whole list here, there are like a dozen of them, but self-modeling refers to the strategy where the persuader first indicates his or her own intention to donate and chooses to act as a role model for this persuadee to follow. In this Persuasion for Good, they actually get people to donate to a cause. I forget what it is, like for feeding children or something. Literally, they give their money to this cause. Emotional appeal refers to elicitation of specific emotions, personal related inquiry. So there are different persuasion strategies, and she built each of these different strategies into the chat model. So, and then she had subjects to play this role. And she would give a survey to the subjects. And there's something called the Schwartz theory of basic values, which is a way of assessing the motivations of individuals. So the ultimate question is, what kind of people respond to what kind of argument? And so let me point out that this is really interesting. Because at this point, the game is not, it's interesting that you're using NPCs and AI to make a game more real and more deep. But now you're using the game as kind of a research instrument. The game motif is something that's helping you in your psychological research. So this is kind of an interesting study. So she will be here. And she has created a game online, an advanced version of this. Originally, it was just a chatbot, but she's created an advanced version of this where she's going to ask you all to play the game in the class, and so you're going to be all laboratory rats come next Monday. So sorry about that. Anyway, so. Second thing is explainable AI. Explainable AI is really fascinating. So it's well known that machine learning models tend to be black boxes, or at least at the beginning they're black boxes. You're putting a tremendous amount of data in, you're adjusting all kinds of weights in the model, whether they be fully connected neural networks or whether they be transformers or anything like that. Or convolutional neural networks, and then in the end, you put you put 1 million images, labeled images, into the network, and in the end, you put the 1,000,001st image into the network, and you say, is there a puppy dog in this image, or what's in this image, and the neural network says it's a puppy dog. So how does it do that? That was a very big question. And I think one of the seminal papers that came out about this is this paper by Zeiler and Fergus called Visualizing and Understanding Convolutional Neural Networks. So let me say, first of all, if you don't know, let me just ask, who knows what a transformer is? Most people, okay, all right. So transformer is the architecture of a neural network that is most often used for language models. They're all based on transformers. They're essentially sequence-to-sequence models, but I won't get into that. Convolutional neural network is different. Convolutional neural network is kind of intrinsically two-dimensional. It was made specifically with the idea of analyzing images, and it was sort of where the first real breakthroughs were done. There's something called AlexNet in 2012 or something like that, where these models could actually identify the objects that are in the model. So they're fascinating. People saying, well, how does it do it? Well, so this paper by Zeiler and Fergus started looking at what are called the attention maps, or the feature maps, from layer to layer to layer to layer. So these convolutional neural networks are a sequence of layers, of neurons. And in the early layers, the maps showed just things like, layer 2, just arcs or lines or very primitive objects. And as it gets to deeper and deeper layers, it gets to be more and more complex how the information is represented, until only finally can you actually identify a boat, a house, a dog, all those sorts of things. Originally, there were like 500 labels or something like that. This was kind of a very remarkable thing. And it was seminal not just because it explained things. And let me say, explainable AI has been touted as really important because for mission critical type of things, for legal reasons, for doing things like surgery or that kind of stuff, that where you have to know why or how the model came to some conclusion. But it's more than that. If you're explainable AI is, so that would make it a compliance tool. Explainable AI is a design tool. You cannot make a better model, or it's very difficult to make a better model, to make a new model, if you don't understand how the model is working. So this work by Zeiler and Fergus was, I think, fascinating because it gave an intuitive picture as to what the brain inside this thing is looking like. So you might think, well, okay, can we do that for a language model? And that's what we're doing with our work with Antonio Torralba and his postdoc Tamar. So again, the question is, how do the models work? And the language models, everybody knows them. If I said a vision language model, do people know what a vision language model is? Because you use them all the time. Yeah, tell me.
So it also gives an input from what's actually seeing. For example, what everybody is seeing.
Right. Yeah, so a language model, you just get language input, language output. A vision language model, which you use all the time, ChatGPT is a vision language model. Gemini, they're all vision language models. You can input pictures into them and say what's in the picture, right? So the first thing you have to do is you have to translate the picture into a series of tokens, and then the language into a series of tokens, and then say, the language says what's in this picture. In any case, these vision language models are notoriously bad at spatial reasoning. There's an interesting blog out there, this guy named Nathan Boss, about, and this is 1 year old, so things change rapidly, about why and what in particular language models are horrible at. For example, folding experiments, folding a dice. So I'm not sure if you can read this, and that's probably too small. Language models cannot solve box folding problems and struggle with abstract figures in 3D spaces, things that humans can do, right? They can look at, this 3 dice there and establish what it's going to look like when you fold it. It'll do better at stacking problems. It'll do very good at graphs. But the main thing is that there are areas that are trivial for humans, or at least simple for humans, that language models, at least until a year ago, were very difficult, were not doing well. So this is important for games. Everyone know what this game is? I hope so. I hope you all know. This is Astrobot, which won, I think, best game this year. It's a great game. I mean, it's simplistic and cartoonish, but it's fascinating gameplay. Anyway, so for language models, you want to know, and I'm going a little bit over here. I hope this is not disastrous for you because it's winter term. You want to know how to create an agent that can play the game. This is something kind of a holy grail in a way. Get an agent that can play a game. That then the agent can test the game for you, among other things. So here's Astrobot, and Astrobot's got to know, which direction are the coins? What are you going to do? That all by itself was really difficult. So our postdoc researcher said, okay, let's come up with a toy problem, which is basically something like this. Color patching experiments. So there are two, you just give two images. Give the image on the left, which is 3 squares, red, green, blue, and the image on the right, which is blue, green, black. And you say to the language model, given the picture, the color of the square to the left of the green square is da-da-da-da. And then the corrupted one is the color of the square to the right of the green square is, and the answer obviously is black. So in the first case it's red, second case is black, and then up and down as well. Okay, so there are a series of types of experiments for machine learning models where you patch from one model into another. In other words, you have one model do this whole problem on the left, color the square to the left. You have another model simultaneously do the one on the right, and then you patch some of the activations, typically only one activation, from this model into this model, and see how it corrupts what's going on. It's a technique for exploring the workings of a model, how the information flows through the model. And one conclusion, which is fairly simple, is what we found so far is that the language part, percolates more fast. More fast meaning in fewer layers, the model understands left versus right, than it does the picture on the left and the picture on the right. So the image information is slower, and so it'll know. So as the model's going along, it'll get right instead of left, but right in the first image is blue, which is wrong. So it'll get the wrong answer for a short time until it catches up and finds the image on the right. All right, I kind of gave a discombobulated explanation of that, but in any case, these patching experiments are one way of looking into these models. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about here is creating a game assistant. And this is fun. This is something I've just been doing. We have a colleague at Stanford, her name's Monica Lamb, and she's a specialist in hallucination. I assume, everybody here familiar with hallucination, right? That one of the real problems, Gesundheit, one of the real problems with language models is that they all of a sudden start inventing stuff. And they invent stuff with tremendous certainty. And you have to really beat them to convince them that they're wrong. Anyway, so this is obviously not a good thing. Monica Lamb has worked on hallucination for a while, and in particular, they developed something called Genie worksheets. So one of the problems with hallucination is you have open web searches, right? Your language model will go out and search on the web and can come up with contradictory sources or something like that. Well, for some applications, instead of doing open web searches, this Genie worksheets is for some applications which you can create a database, and what's called a Postgres SQL database of curated sources that are reliable, that are hopefully non-contradictory, and that the model refers to, and therefore it's much faster. And their first attempt was, at this was like choosing a restaurant in Palo Alto. But it maintains the conversational character of language models. So somebody goes to the Genie worksheet or Genie worksheet app and says, I want to have a date with somebody at a restaurant, and I need these characteristics, and it will actually make the reservation for you. So as I say here, instead of ask the web, Genie forces the model to answer only a curated Postgres SQL database and use explicit tools. All right, so this is great for games, right? So as I say, I play Stellar Blade, and I find myself sitting on the couch playing Stellar Blade and saying, this is a puzzle that I can't solve, and I don't even want to solve it. Please just tell me, how do I get past this hanging bridge or whatever? And So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I said, okay, well, maybe we can create, just as an exploration, a Genie worksheet for Stellar Blade. The first thing you have to do is find data sources. Well, so there are a lot of data sources. I mean, Stellar Blade is like only 1 year old, but there are already a lot of data sources out there. There's official documentation. Stellar Blade is made by a company called Shift Up from Korea, I believe. And it's made with Unreal Engine. So there's an official Shift Up documentation, which is good. There are fan wikis, walkthroughs. There are things called patch notes, which are really important source. Reddit, YouTube guides, things like that. So the first thing you have to do is you create a database by curating these things. And then with the Genie worksheets, you put in the various tasks that people might, what kinds of questions might people ask? How do I get from point A to point B? How do I get from the desert to Zion, or from Zion to the space elevator, those sorts of things. And so this is a work in progress. This isn't by no means finished. And anybody wants, they can help me do this. This is another type of application for language models to games. Okay, so let me finish up here. That's it for today. I did want to mention some of the projects. Oh, any questions up till now? No? Okay, I mean, I'm going to stick around afterwards, so if you have more questions, feel free. I did want to mention some of the projects from last year. Just to give you an idea of what people did, there were, I think, 8 projects altogether in the class. There was one called Factory Settings by Ben Zandonati. And in Factory Settings, he created a game with Unreal Engine, or a proto game, just a piece of a game, where the main character was this robot that's lost in a factory. And there are other robots wandering around who can't think. They're stupid. And so this one robot has to teach the other robots how to help him, in this case, solve some puzzles. And some of the puzzles require 2 people. For example, require 2 people to do it. One of the robots has to stand on a button while the other robot at the other end of the room opens the door, right? So puzzles which intrinsically require multiple robot participation and teaching the robots how to do that. So it's pretty impressive and you got 3 weeks, so it's not a lot of time to do these things. Another person named Chris Pilcher and his colleague Essen Tutunku, who is actually going to start working with us, did something called PIP in Moby Dick, a metaphor, a hallucination as imagination. Hallucination obviously is considered a bug in a language model, but maybe you can consider it a feature. Maybe hallucination can be used for creative purposes. They actually wrote this up the month after and submitted it to HCI, Human Computer Interaction Conference, and presented this in Tokyo in the summer. So this is like pretty amazing what they did. And then Alex Lehman used a game called Stardew Valley. There's a paper that came out a couple of years ago from Stanford, I believe, on a Unity-based game. Does anybody know what Unity is? It's like these kind of 2-dimensional as opposed to Unreal Engine, which is 3-dimensional. A Unity-based game where multiple characters interact with one another and develop a kind of society. So this was something like that, where he puts a character into Stardew Valley and the character learns to interact with the other characters. So those were 3, that's a kind of very brief, simple explanation, but those are 3 things that were projects. I'm happy to discuss that more with you if you want. Finally, Wednesday, Nate Gross is coming here. Nate Gross is my colleague, and this is his abstract. He has actually participated in the creation of games, as they say, from nuts to soup or something like that, like from the very beginning of conceptualization to building a team where literally thousands of people are employed to do the various rendering and things like that in the games. And he gave a presentation to some students. Does anybody know what MIT SDM is? System Design Management. It's like a school connected to the Sloan School. 27 of those students came out to the Bay Area in the spring, and he gave a present. I don't know anything about system design management. I'll find somebody who does. And Nate gave a presentation to them. He really blew them away. I mean, he's like just the kind of comprehensive knowledge of all the things that go into games is, to me, was amazing. So I said, okay, you have to come to MIT in 4-degree weather to present the things that you showed to students before. So he'll be here on Wednesday, and that's it. Thanks. See you on Wednesday. Oh, thank you.